Good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie Wee. I am a professor with the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Georgetown College, and I will be your moderator for today. Welcome to the second CivicLabTO presentation hosted by the City of Toronto. I would like to begin by recognizing that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories in which our college and university campuses are located. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We also want to acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those of us who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly forcibly displanted Africans, brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. These acknowledgements provide a backdrop to today's presentations on building an equitable city. The recent discovery at Kamloops, the continuing advocacy of the Black Lives Matter movements, and the rise of anti-Asian racism during the COVID-19 pandemic serve as sharp reminders of the work which remains before us in our various capacities as city leaders, policymakers, and members of our democracy. This work is especially pressing for Toronto, where the values of diversity and multiculturalism remain so central to its identity. Helping us in our deliberations today are Srijoni Rahman and Alika Curtis-Clark from the Equity and Diversity Unit, Jennifer Lafontaine of the Indigenous Affairs Office, and Yao Togobo from the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. For those of us who are here for the first time, you're welcome to raise questions using the Q&A function, or simply type in the chat box, both of which are located at the bottom right corner of your screen. If, because of time constraints, we cannot get to your question during the Q&A segment later, please rest assured that we will have the speakers answer them, and we will share your responses with your professor in the coming days. As with last week and all other city sessions, our meeting today will be recorded. Without further ado, Councillor and Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, who is unable to join us today in person, will kick us off with a video address. Following that, we will hear from a familiar face, Manjit Jita, Director of Strategic Partnerships, who will tell us more about the work of CivicLabTO, of which today's presentations are a part. Let's hear now from Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Good morning. Welcome to our second session of CivicLabTO Common Curriculum. Developed in collaboration with Toronto's world-class public sector universities, the CivicLabTO program is led by the city's Strategic Partnerships Office. Its goal is to provide a platform for our next generation of leaders to better understand the challenges and opportunities cities face and collaborate with us to develop solutions. These partnerships also bring together the incredible research and design expertise of academics and city staff, expanding our ability to create evidence-based strategies, strong public policies, and impactful programs. Cities are at the forefront of a social and economic revolution. In partnership with other orders of government, academia, not-for-profits, and the private sector, cities are moving far beyond providing services to the public and taking a leadership role in driving long overdue social and economic change. We recognize that the last 20 months have been a really tough time for all of us. With schools forced to pivot to online lessons, it has been hard for students to accommodate to new learning models, while at the same time facing the economic challenges brought by business closing and vanishing jobs. Sadly, the pandemic has affected some communities more than others. Black, Indigenous, and other equity-deserving communities have been severely impacted. The COVID-19 pandemic did not create this inequity. It began decades, if not centuries ago. The pandemic simply amplified the problems and brought them to the forefront. It has shown us clearly that more must be done. I speak to this reality from my experiences as a man of color and the only Black member on Toronto City Council. I know that success will only come if we work together to create a truly equitable society. As a councillor and deputy mayor, I have worked with others to shine the light on inequity issues and promote diversity as the foundation of our ongoing prosperity. Toronto's motto, diversity is our strength, not only reflects our core value, it is the compass that guides our approach to governance and to the evolution of our economy. We all have a responsibility to ensure that we build a society that is just, one where equity, inclusion, and Indigenous reconciliation are priorities. Our schools, universities, and colleges play an essential role in ensuring that the next generation of leaders have the knowledge and skills needed to build a post-pandemic city where everyone matters and we all thrive. They are our valued partners as we rebuild our city and engineer urban transformation. I hope you have an informative and engaging morning with our presenters today. They are amongst Canada's most outstanding public servants, and Toronto is fortunate to have them as part of our leadership structure. Once again, welcome to CivicLabTO Common Curriculum. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day. Enjoy this day. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you, Councillor and Deputy Mayor Thompson, who I'm sure is here with us in spirit, if not in person. Someone who is here with us in person is Manjeet Jeeta, and we'll hear from her next. Over to you, Manjeet.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and good morning, students, faculty, and staff. It's great to be here with you again for our second CivicLabTO session. I'm actually joining you from Vancouver, which is very exciting for me being here, but very early in the morning. So as you know, this is the second session in the City of Toronto's civics program in partnership with our wonderful universities and colleges. As most of you know, my name is Manjeet Jeeta, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships in the City Manager's Office here at the City, and we're the division that manages and develops the CivicLabTO programming. But before I get started, I have to tell you how interesting it was to see all of your questions and comments in the chat during the last session. And as Deputy Mayor Baila, who joined us for that session, said, this CivicLabTO program is absolutely about a relationship. It is not a one way, so we really want to hear your insights and your innovation into all of these areas. And as Leslie said, we'll be looking for your comments as they come through. And it's this innovation and this partnership, which is why we're putting so many resources into this, and the time and effort of the staff that have joined you today and will join you for the future sessions as well. So as you know, last week, staff provided foundational information on how the city functions, its governance, its operations, and its finances. Today is also a foundational session. Today, we're going to focus on equity and reconciliation as we look to building inclusive cities where we all thrive, not just a few of us. Our speakers today will focus on the City of Toronto's policies and strategies that guide the work that we do, with the next session after this focusing in on some of the more programmatic features of how we implement these strategies. The session, I believe, will be critical to your core skills and understanding, whether you're studying to be an urban planner, a water treatment specialist, a social worker, a business specialist, transportation engineer, or public administrator. It really doesn't matter. These are foundational things that you will learn about today. And it doesn't matter which program you're in. I would suggest that the information you get today will be important for everything that you do. And I would suggest that every assignment or research paper you write, you should take an equity and reconciliation lens to your work. And as you do that, think also about your interactions within your teams and with the communities you interact with professionally and in your personal lives, and the building of respectful partnerships and relationships. Consider the value and the expertise that we all bring to these experiences, especially those from Indigenous and equity-deserving communities. Consider how each of us communicate and tell our stories, and how we create inclusive spaces to support this. Consider what it is to be respectful and the importance of relationship building, and consider the value and the expertise that community members and those with lived experience bring to the research, the program development, and the evaluation that you conduct or will be engaged in, and how we can apply an equity and reconciliation approach to that work. Through the 6 sessions of this series, you will be introduced to staff from across the corporation. And I've deliberately and consciously made sure that when you see those staff, you see yourselves in them, and that it's all of you, not just some of you, who see yourselves in the faces of those staff and the experiences they bring. So welcome to our session on building an equitable city. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Leslie to introduce our great speakers today. Over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Manjeet. Now I'm pleased to bring on board 2 of our 4 speakers for the day. And to kick us off, are Srijoni Raman and Alika Curtis-Clark from the Equity and Diversity Unit. Over to you, Alika and Srijoni.
Thank you so much, Leslie and Manjeet, for that amazing introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Srijoni Raman, and I'm a consultant with the equity team at the City of Toronto. It's amazing to be here this morning, and a huge thank you to the entire CivicLab team for putting together this incredible session. For equity and inclusion purposes, I wanted to also share that my pronouns are she and her, and that I'm a brown South Asian woman with long black hair wearing a white top. I would also like to invite my colleague who's here with me today to please introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Alika Curtis-Clark and I'm also a consultant with the city's equity unit. My pronouns are also she and her, and I'm going to add that I'm a Black woman with a black afro wearing a blue dress. I'm so happy to be part of this event, and I'm excited to discuss the role of the equity unit with you today.
Thank you, Alika. Thank you so much. So with that, we will get started. So Alika, please next slide. Thank you. So as you know, Toronto is one of the most diverse cities in the world. In fact, 51.5% of the population in Toronto were racialized in 2016, and 22% of Torontonians over the age of 15 have a disability. So Toronto is clearly diverse, and it is known to be as such as well at both national and international levels. And the city very much recognizes this and acknowledges the importance and strength in diversity. And hence, the motto of the city is diversity, our strength. The city also recognizes the importance of engaging with communities to ensure their participation in decision-making, and also acknowledges the barriers that are facing groups and the unique history, status, and the present-day experiences of Indigenous communities and their right to self-determination. This deep recognition is truly embedded across all the work that we do, and also forms the very foundation of the work that we do in our unit and in the city. So we wanted to start with giving you that overview. Next slide, please, Alika. Thank you. So indeed, the city is diverse, and it is very much built and strengthened by the immense contributions of its Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving groups. However, systems, institutions, processes, policies are not always neutral, but are often structured intentionally or unintentionally to give advantage or preference to certain groups over others. And these have been shaped, embedded, and normalized over time through things like colonialism and the oppression and marginalization of certain communities. And they continue to persist today in the form of systemic barriers. These are barriers in the system that prevent groups from accessing opportunities and creates disparities, and actually impacts the very life outcomes of Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving groups, some of which you will see here listed today. Now, some of these barriers could be subtle, while others are not, and we know and recognize them to marginalize and impact Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving groups, such as barriers in the justice system. Indeed, the data above, such as the disproportionate poverty rates for Indigenous, Black communities and people with disabilities, and the continuous calls to action and advocacy from communities, makes it clear that these barriers exist and persist very much today. I also wanted to note here that beyond systemic barriers, there are also other types of barriers, such as attitudinal barriers or physical barriers. So what then is an example of a systemic barrier? Here I would like to share a personal story with you, which is that I immigrated to Canada with my parents when I was a child. And upon arrival to Canada, we quickly realized that my parents were facing this one barrier every time that they tried to apply for a job. Now, my parents were highly educated and had high-paying jobs in South Asia, which is where I'm from. But upon arrival, a common job requirement was that they needed to have Canadian work experience at the time. And that this created a huge hurdle for them. And I know this is the case for many immigrant families where they were not only where they had to return to school and their qualifications were not recognized. And as a result, they had to take on employment that they were often overqualified for. This not only had an impact on my family, on my parents, but it also had an impact on me generationally in terms of the kinds of opportunities and the life experiences that shaped my childhood and adolescence. Another example is the example of office temperatures, for instance. Now in the 1960s, the office temperature was determined based on the average body temperature of a man. It was only later that they figured out that women's body temperatures are slightly different. And as a result, the temperature that is usually set in offices to be like at the comfort level for everyone is actually too cold for women. So these are just some of the examples. There are countless other examples as well around the world. And this is important, and we recognize this because the city supports many important areas of social needs, such as housing, childcare, employment, transportation. So it is crucial that equity considerations are very much built into the decision-making processes in a manner that is consistent. While change is happening, we know that there's more to be done to advance access, equity, and reconciliation. Next slide, please, Alika. Thank you. So speaking of systemic barriers and how to address them, now some people might lean on equality to say that all individuals and communities should be treated the same. Essentially, yes, equality is important. However, its application really focuses on distributing resources evenly. How resources or opportunities get distributed is not differentiated by need. So for instance, if you look at the image to my left, where all three people are standing on ground that is uneven. Some are on higher ground, some are on lower grounds, but they all receive the exact same thing, which is one box. Now it helps the person that's standing on slightly higher ground to look over the fence, but it doesn't really do anything for the person standing on lower grounds to be able to see the game. Now, if you turn your attention to the image to the right, where equity is happening, here you will notice that each individual is getting customized supports based on their experiences and how the ground, the leveling of the ground is impacting them. So for instance, the person on the higher ground gets one box, and the person that's standing on lower ground where the ground is disproportionately impacting their experiences, they get 3 boxes. And here they're able to actually enjoy and access the game. So equity accounts for the inequality by customizing the level and types of resources and supports that an individual or communities receive as per their unique experiences with the system. A focus on equity when designing these solutions involves a very close examination of what is needed in order for a person to achieve success. And the elimination of disparities is complex because one size does not fit all. So then what would a third ideal image look like? So in this slide and in this image, why don't we remove the fence altogether? Here you can see the 3 people removing the fence, the very barrier that was blocking their view and their access to be able to enjoy the game fully. And here, all 3 would not need support or accommodation because inequity itself, the system itself, has been removed. The barrier has been removed and the space has been redesigned in a way that allows for everyone to be able to enjoy the view. Identifying and removing these barriers is a first step to ensuring that everyone has equitable access and towards facilitating long-term change in a way that redesigns and reconstructs a service, program, support, or system that can create equitable access to opportunities and eventually equitable outcomes as well. Next slide, please, Alika. So who are we talking about? You've heard me now say this many times, Indigenous, Black, and equity deserving groups. So who are we actually referring to? The city currently focuses on a number of Indigenous, Black, and equity deserving groups that are listed here on the slide. The reason that we specifically mention Indigenous peoples first is because of their unique status as the original stewards of the land. Indigenous people are listed separately from equity deserving groups because more than equity, they seek economic and social prosperity and self-determination, which have been eroded and continue to be impacted by colonialism. We also mentioned Black communities as distinct due to the historic and current disproportionate systemic barriers, marginalization, and anti-Black racism facing Black communities and people, such as in the justice system. As such, this distinction beyond equity acknowledges justice and freedom for Black communities. Equity deserving groups are those that are collectively facing challenges to accessing opportunities and supports. Now, you may ask, why do we say equity deserving and not equity seeking, which is a term that is more commonly used? The reason is that in the city, we believe that it is not, the responsibility is not on communities or groups to go and seek or look for equity, but that the onus is on the system to ensure that their services, programs, policies are designed in a way so that communities receive the equitable treatment that they deserve. I also want to note here that while this is a very broad list and there's multiple dimensions of identity here, we do not leave, we're not all wearing one-dimensional identities. We have often layered, overlapping traits that interplay to shape the way we experience the world. We refer to this as intersectionality. For instance, for myself, I'm a racialized person, I'm a woman, I'm also an immigrant. And for me, while I may face barriers for not having been born in Canada, for being a woman, or for being racialized, I also acknowledge that in a lot of places and spaces, English, for instance, is my primary language, and I'm fluent in the language. And so therefore, the way I interact with systems and my world experiences are very much shaped by my multidimensional and unique identities. Next slide, please, Alika. Thank you. So what do we mean when we say equity, diversity, and inclusion? These are terms that has become buzzwords recently, but we really wanted to dig a little bit deeper and ensure that we can build a common understanding of the terms and also recognize that they're not all the same and they're not interchangeable. Equity, as you know now, is the customized supports that recognize the historic and systemic inequalities impacting the unique experiences of Black, Indigenous, and equity deserving groups. Diversity is about the wide range of dimensions, qualities, characteristics that are within a person, a group, or a community that are both visible or invisible. For instance, Toronto is a diverse city because not everyone has the same experiences, the same identities, or the same backgrounds. Inclusion, on the other hand, is actually about creating an environment in which a group or an individual can feel welcome, supported, and valued, and are able to participate fully. So with these distinct concepts in mind, I will now pass it over to my wonderful colleague, Alika, for more information and to dig a little bit deeper into the work that we do. Over to you, Alika.
Thank you, Srijani. So now that you have a better understanding of the concept of equity, let's get more into this topic and the type of work that we do. I'll start with who we are. A center of excellence for the City of Toronto, empowering staff to drive service equity. The word cloud below provides some of the ways in which we do this. We provide expertise, best practices, leadership, tools, resources, and engage in knowledge exchange and innovation. The concept of service equity is based on the understanding that systems, institutions, processes, and policies are not neutral, but often structured intentionally or unintentionally to give advantage or preference to certain groups over others. It's focused on the deliberate and intentional actions to remove barriers to access and ensure the fair distribution of services to drive equal outcomes for all residents of Toronto. Workforce equity, on the other hand, focuses on who is delivering those services by working to build a workforce that better reflects Toronto's diverse population. The city has a separate team called the Diversity and Inclusion Unit, whose work focuses on this type of equity and on making sure that staff feel respected and meaningfully engaged once they join the organization. The city's vision statement on access, equity, and diversity, which was adopted by City Council in 2003, recognizes the dignity and worth of all people and seeks to equitably treat communities and employees by fairly providing services and consulting with communities to make sure everyone can participate in decision-making. Next, I want to highlight that there's a difference between equity in outcomes versus equity in processes. When I say equity in process, I'm talking about actions like understanding and acknowledging existing unique inequities that certain groups face because of how society's been structured, having diverse staff teams, making sure that you have an inclusive consultation process when making decisions, using culturally sensitive methodologies to come to conclusions in your research, and having clear, transparent, and frequent communications with the communities impacted by your work. Here's an example of equity in process. Let's imagine that a new community center is opening up in a Toronto neighborhood. It's not about looking at how many diverse community members gain access to the facility. It's about looking into who has a voice around the table when making decisions, such as where it will be located and what types of programs and activities will be offered. On the other hand, equity in outcomes involves eliminating or mitigating unique barriers, addressing root causes of inequities, and building trust and strengthening relationships with Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving groups. Both approaches to equity are needed for the successful rollout of any program, policy, or initiative. I want to take a step back and illustrate for you where our unit sits within the organization, and then talk a bit about what types of services our section provides. The Equity Unit, highlighted within the red box, is one of 5 small units housed within the Equity and Human Rights section. We serve an internal-facing corporate function to empower city divisions who provide services directly to the public with the knowledge and resources to embed equity considerations into their work. Each unit has their own distinct mandate that feeds into the broader equity ecosystem of the city. This includes the Human Rights Office, the Equity Unit, which is our unit, the Accessibility Unit, a new Gender Equity Unit, and a new Data for Equity Unit. Our section works with a Diversity and Inclusion Unit that's noted at the top right with the dotted line, all other city divisions, as well as agencies and corporations to drive equity goals at the city. The city also has a number of other key community-facing units and offices that are also part of our overall equity ecosystem. They each implement strategies and action plans, all with the goal of eliminating barriers for Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities, ultimately making life better for all Torontonians. Some examples are the city's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, the Indigenous Affairs Office, and the Poverty Reduction Strategy Office. With all of that being said, although equity is our unit's focus, equity is everyone in the organization's business. Every City of Toronto staff member should be asking themselves questions like, how do I ensure that I value the people I work with and treat them with respect? How do I ensure that I respect the dignity and uniqueness of the people to whom I provide services? And how do I ensure that the programs and policies I design and deliver result in equitable outcomes for the city's diverse communities? Now that we've established who we are and where we're situated within the organization, let's jump into what we do. I'm going to highlight a few examples of specific programs and services that we run and how these feed into the city's overall equity landscape. This will illustrate how equity goes from being more theoretical to the practical application of the concept. The first is our Equity Lens tool. This is a corporate online tool that helps city staff perform an equity analysis. It enables city staff to identify barriers and evaluate the equity impact of a policy, service, or program, and identify strengths and areas for improvement. This tool helps us to embed equity into decision-making because it auto-generates an equity impact statement for staff that's required on all significant policy or program reports and is mandatory in reports to council and as part of the equity responsive budgeting process. The equity responsive budgeting process is a process that's embedded into the city's financial planning structure. It highlights how our budget reflects equity considerations and helps staff understand how changes in our budget may be positively or negatively impacting certain communities. This helps to embed accountability for city divisions and informs leadership's decision-making. Next is our equity-related advisory bodies. We have a number of community advisory bodies that we seek advice from. These are mechanisms that we use to hear the voices of community members so we can incorporate their feedback into our decision-making processes. One example is the 2S LGBTQ+ Council Advisory Body. This group provides us with advice to ensure the interests and needs of the diverse 2S LGBTQ+ communities are reflected in city programs and service delivery. Having these types of bodies creates a level of transparency so communities can see what we're working on improving and can hold us accountable. And finally, the Count Yourself In Workforce Survey. This survey is a self-identification survey for all Toronto Public Service employees. It enables us to obtain demographic data on our workforce and to hold us accountable by measuring the city's progress towards realizing its motto, diversity, our strength. Now that you have a bit more, you know a bit more about some of the programs and services we provide, I wanted to go over a few of our unit's challenges and opportunities. The first is gaining a shared understanding of equity. This first challenge recognizes that there's a spectrum of understanding of equity across the organization. So we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of divisions, keeping in mind that staff have very diverse lines of work and that not everyone will start with the same understanding. We need to equitably provide guidance to divisions based on their understanding and unique circumstances. The next one is around keeping up with Toronto's changing demographics. This challenge requires the Toronto Public Service to better reflect the population it serves in order to inspire confidence and build trust with communities. As the population evolves, so too will the needs of our diverse communities. This has never been truer than it is now during the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to understand things like who is accessing which services and who's not, so we can look into potential barriers. Next is connecting with communities and building trust. It's important for us to reach out to build stronger relationships with our communities and increase engagement opportunities wherever possible, with the understanding that communities may have an inherent mistrust of government entities and being able to navigate that mistrust. And the last opportunity is citywide equity data collection and use. It's necessary to have a consistent way that we manage data across such a large organization. The Data for Equity unit will be implementing the city's Data for Equity strategy. This is our citywide strategy to facilitate the collection of socio-demographic data and use of disaggregated data to better support the city's equity goals and priorities. So, needless to say, the equity landscape of the city is constantly evolving, and I'm so happy that we're on our way towards tackling these challenges. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation today. We hope you've learned some new concepts and that you have a better understanding of the role of the city's equity unit and some of the work we've done and are continuing to do to drive equity at the city. And we'd be happy to answer any of your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Alika and Srijoni. There are a number of questions that are coming in the chat box. Thank you for them, student audience. And I hope that they will come into for the following presenters and speakers. And with that in mind, next we'll hear from Jennifer Lafontaine from the Indigenous Affairs Office. Over to you, Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. Just gonna. Okay, Tansi, Buju, ni Indonesiakas nebi makwa, Jijibzagi Gining Ndonjaba, Michifque and Da. My name is Jennifer Lafontaine. My spirit name is Water Bear. I am from Duck Lake, Saskatchewan, and I'm a Métis woman. You can see the Métis flag in this image. It is the blue one with the white infinity symbol. Some say that the two sides represent the coming together of two cultures. Some talk about our past, present, and future circling around and of our nations always being here. Okay, and now I'm just figuring out how to move to the next slide while I'm sharing my screen. Can you help me with that? Oh, there we go. Okay. No. Okay, I'm going to need some help with the sharing of my presentation. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Okay, so just the next slide.
One second. How is that? Is everyone seeing the slide?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the next slide, great. Okay, so just a little bit of context about the Indigenous landscape in Toronto. So we have communities of historical significance. You may hear them in land acknowledgements, the Huron and the Haudenosaunee. There are many sacred sites across the city from these communities. We also have the Anishinaabe, the traditional territory as well, and we know the Mississauga of the Credit are our treaty holders. So we have communities of historical significance, we have treaty partners, and we have the Indigenous, the urban Indigenous community that is diverse and has many different nations. Next slide. Okay, so what we know about the urban Indigenous community in Toronto, it's the largest Indigenous population in Ontario and the fourth largest in Canada. There's upwards of 100,000 Indigenous people in Toronto, and they represent First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. And even though those are three titles, there are so many different communities and experiences. There are people who have come recently from reserves. There are people who have lived their whole lives in Toronto. And what we do hold in common is a lack of visibility. So although it is such a large community, the general public can go without seeing anybody, seeing that community. So here I have on the slide, I have Spadina wrote, and you will see on the top it says Anishinaabe and Ishpadina. So this is a traditional name in the language in Anishinaabe-Moan of Spadina. And so this was, although this is a City of Toronto sign, it was originally a art intervention by Susan Blight, an Indigenous artist, to raise awareness about how little we see Indigenous markers in our city to identify who we are, how little language we see, how little, how many places there's absence. Even in our introduction with Councillor Thompson saying he's the only Black councillor, there are no Indigenous councillors on City Council. So invisibility is one of the huge challenges of our community because it leads to a lack of belonging in the city. Okay, next slide. So we know that that invisibility has not come from nowhere. It has come with intention over hundreds of years. It has come from colonization. It has come from forced assimilation that's intending to make us invisible, intending to make us believe that we don't have our own culture, our own languages. We know that the attempted genocide of Indigenous people was expressed through residential schools, through banning our cultures and traditions. And so here's just a few statistics that share the impacts of that ongoing oppression. Around 35% of Indigenous adults in Toronto. Pardon me. These statistics are from a Toronto study called Our Health Counts. So 35% of Indigenous adults in Toronto were experiencing houselessness or precarious housing. 25% of Indigenous adults reported they and others in their household did not have enough to eat. 1 in 10 Indigenous adults report filing a missing persons report with the police for a child or family member. And 1 in 3 had a close family or family member die as a result of violence caused by another person. So this lack of well-being, this lack of safety is a direct result of governmental policies intending for the erasure of our communities. And so we also know that we've had generations of people resisting these attempted assimilations and erasures. And so one of the ways that resistance has happened is to advocate to have more voice within the city. Okay, so next slide. So for over 20 years, the Indigenous community in Toronto has advocated for an office within the city who could represent Indigenous community within the municipal government. So in 2018, the Indigenous Affairs Office was born. And over the last 3 years, it has grown to have a director, 3 consultants, a researcher, and an administrator. So we're a small team of 6, small but mighty. And so these are 3 of the key things we work to do. We work with the Indigenous community in Toronto to enhance relationships. We work with the 44 divisions across the city to support their work and provide advice and guidance. And we work on advancing truth, justice, and reconciliation in the city. So what I'm going to do is just take you through some examples with each one to let you know how that works to creating a more equitable city for Indigenous communities. So the first one, working with Indigenous community to enhance relationships. This is essential. So just from the last things that I said, there are legacies of distrust from the government, and that is that government can be seen as a whole, that's all government holds that distrust. And so anything that the city can do to build trust is about writing those relationships. It's about sharing power differently. So as an example, when I mentioned that there's historical partners, there's treaty partners, and then there's the Indigenous urban community. One example in the city is that when different developments are happening, there's a legal obligation to reach out to the treaty partners. So the Mississaugas of the Credit would be contacted to consult about different developments, for example. But if we don't also consult with the urban Indigenous community, we're leaving out the people who live here on this land and have opinions about what that means, what the impacts are to their Indigenous communities. There is not a legal obligation to consult with the urban Indigenous community, but it it is a necessary and important way to build trust and to build relationship, to keep reaching out and engaging with the Indigenous communities, to have their voices, to have our voices help shape the development of the city. The second point, to work with the 44 divisions across the city to support their work and provide advice and guidance. So there is the Indigenous Affairs Office. There are also Indigenous people in all of these 44 divisions. But visibility and trust and relationship building, as I said, is so essential that the different divisions may need support to navigate how their divisional work intersects with Indigenous identities, Indigenous relationships, and decision making. So what happens in our department is that those 44 divisions get split up between our staff. So we all have responsibilities to different divisions. So I have about 12 in my roster. So any of those divisions can come see me to problem solve or to get advice. So for example, recently the Climate Action Fund, that's the Environment Division, came to me and said, you know, we have this, so the Environment Division, the folks there said, we have this Climate Action Fund, and last year we had specific funding allocated for different geographic regions and different identity groups, and nobody applied from the Indigenous community, so we didn't give that money out. Can you help us this year figure out how to do that? And so what I did was I worked with that division to help them do some outreach, that you can't just do the same kind of outreach as you would do for the different geographic groups, because you don't have that trust built, because it might sort of come to people and they don't know who you are or what this is. So that relationship building is essential to be able to bring people into those opportunities, that you have to do extra work. You can't just say, oh, they didn't show up, so it didn't happen. You have to be able to sort of work creatively, build partnerships, and find your way through. So I worked with them to build those relationships. We had several partners come on board this year who are able to access that fund. And it opens up further conversations about how to engage the Indigenous community around environmental issues. It's essential. We know that we're missing the boat if we're not including Indigenous voices on climate action. As an example, this is a global statistic. 5% of the world's population is Indigenous, and they steward over lands that support over 80% of the world's global diversity. So there are lessons to learn. There are ways to have relationship with our plant and animal relatives, with the world around us, that we can learn from each other with, and that absence is a loss to the city. So as we work together to build that relationship with the Indigenous community, we also work with that division to support them to build the tools that they need to build ongoing successful relationships with Indigenous community. So just to say, it's not my job to do all the Indigenous things. It's my job to help build those relationships and build an understanding that there needs to be effort made to do that work meaningfully with Indigenous community. So those are so that's an example of that divisional work. I'll just give you one other, because this is sort of directly connected to my own experience. So before I joined the city, I worked in community, and I had an arts collective that did earthwork and land-based work and art. And And so as I moved into my role in the city, it gave me a different way of leveraging the issues that were really important to me as a community member. So, for example, there are policies that are within the city and that are also larger policies like UNDRIP, the United Nations Indigenous Declaration. UNDRIP. UNDRIP. Can somebody type it in there for me? I've lost United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Pardon me. I wanted to make sure I said it all because sometimes one of the things that was so difficult for me when I started at the city was all the acronyms. And that's certainly one of the barriers, right? That as we try and relate to the city, we don't know what any of these things are. So there you go. Okay, so we have policies like UNDRIP says that Indigenous people have the right to access land for ceremony and cultural preservation. And yet we have opposing policies at the city that make that impossible for the Indigenous community. So for example, for me to have a sacred fire on the land for part of my ceremony, I might need to pay for a permit. I might have to apply to have that right, and I might have to pay. Now, recently, the payment has been waived for Indigenous people as an act of reconciliation, but also we're exploring how to remove the barriers that stop people from accessing land for things like sacred fires. So we're doing work with community to create more opportunity for them to access land easily. Similarly, if I want to tap a maple tree to tap the sweet water, which is the maple sap, that's essential for ceremony. That's a grief ceremony. It's a spring sort of regeneration ceremony. But the city is like, the trees are to be protected, so we shouldn't touch them. We can't harvest. So it brings to light the differences in our world, in different worldviews. And so when the city does work to acknowledge a different worldview and to work to change policies that impede people's relationship to the land, to culture, to ceremony, that is when change is happening in the city. Okay, so that's a little bit about the divisions. And then the third one is huge right now. That's advancing truth, justice, and reconciliation in the city. So right now we are on the cusp at the Indigenous Affairs Office of creating a reconciliation action plan. So we're in the final stages of development. The action plan, actually, could you go to the next slide, Rihanna, please? Okay, so our reconciliation action plan is a city policy, a document that will guide for 10 years all divisions, all across the city, to take action for truth, justice, and reconciliation. So this doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from years and years of advocacy, of fighting for justice by the Indigenous community and hard work by different groups to acknowledge what needs to change. And so, for example, the city has strategic directions in the Statement of Commitments to Aboriginal Peoples. We have our national calls to action set out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission from 2015. We have the principles detailed in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. There it is for me. And the calls for justice outlined by the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. So all of these policies have led us to create concrete action strategies for the city to take on our path to reconciliation. And just as a reminder, just as a first piece, reconciliation cannot happen without truth. And that's what is happening right now, as the general public is feeling in a different way, understanding in a different way the impacts of residential schools because of the children who have been found in unmarked graves across the country. This is not new information. This information was in the Truth and Reconciliation report. Those were the children who were missing. There were already documented all the children who have died. Within our own within Indigenous communities, this is not new information, but on a national level, the emotion has changed, the feeling has changed. People are taking in that truth in a different way right now, and that is essential for a path to reconciliation. Understanding and acknowledging the truth, having an awareness of the past harm that was inflicted, making atonement for the causes of that harm, the colonial structures, the attempted genocide, the forced assimilation, and taking action to change behavior. And that's what this Reconciliation Action Plan is, actions to change behavior. So there are several different sections in the Reconciliation Action Plan. There are actions for trust, to right relations and share power, actions for justice, actions for financial reparations, and actions for that the Indigenous Affairs Office takes the lead. So there are 27 actions in total with many sub-actions. So I'm not going to go through it all with you. Could you advance the slide for me, please? But I'm going to tell you that the action plan is bold. It pushes boundaries. It acknowledges the need to do things, to not just talk about them, but to look at the city structures. And we start with what's called a colonial audit or a reconciliation audit. That's looking at all the policies, procedures, programs within the city and identifying the colonial forces that have shaped them and the ways that we can change those to better right our relations, to better reflect the needs of the Indigenous community. So there's large scale ones, and then there's issues such as housing, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and so on. And then there's issues such as language revitalization. And I'll just give you this as a final example. So one of the actions in the action plan is about language revitalization. And just as an example, I am a new language learner. So when my grandpa was 14, he left Duck Lake, Saskatchewan, and he never went back until he was about in his 80s. And he asked my dad to take him to a party. It was an anniversary party of a family member that he wanted to go to. And at that party, my dad listened and watched and looked, and he said to himself, like, what language is my dad speaking? And so my grandpa spoke Michif, which is the language of the Métis people. It's a blended language of French and colonial languages, as well as Cree and other Indigenous languages. He also spoke Cree fluently. He spoke French and he spoke English, but my dad grew up only with English. So that was the very first time that my dad met his Métis community, his Métis family. In fact, it was the very first time that he understood that that was his cultural identity. And that is what that forced assimilation is. That's that my grandpa walked away from his culture, and because of racism, because of colonization, because of the oppression that he felt, he did not talk about his culture for decades. So language revitalization for me is an essential piece of reconnecting with my culture. I introduced you, but it's complex because Michif and Cree are prairie languages. I'm on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, of the Haudenosaunee people. And so as I work to learn language, I learn in different ways. I start to learn Michif, I start to learn Cree, but my introduction to you today was in Anishinaabe-Moan, the language of this land. All of that connects me to my culture. But listen, that also shows you how complex learning language is in the city. The federal government almost exclusively supports language revitalization for singular language revitalization. That's dominantly focused on First Nations, on reserves. It's not on urban populations. So to learn language in an urban population, you are doing a number of things. You're working to build cultural pride because shame about our culture was what we have grown with. And so to overcome that shame and to believe that we have the right to speak our language, we have the right to connect to our culture, is essential in our well-being. Our pride in our culture will support our economic prosperity. It will support our democratic freedoms. It'll support us to have our first Indigenous city councillor. These things are all interconnected. So to have language revitalization in the city, the Reconciliation Action Plan can think outside that box of these federal sort of restrictions and say our urban Indigenous community needs to have opportunities to learn the traditional languages of this territory, but there are people from across Turtle Island. How do we support them? How do we support our West Coast relatives? How do we support our East Coast relatives? How do we support them to feel connected to their language in this big city? And so we need to look at funding differently. We need to look at how we teach language differently. We need to look at how we connect to the land and our culture. All of those things are part of the language revitalization action. And we also want 5,000 new housing units for Indigenous people. We want concrete strategies. So that action plan, just throwing in that piece around housing, is just to tell you that it's far-reaching, that it has so many different pieces that are about building the prosperity and the well-being of Indigenous people in Toronto. Marcy, Miigwech. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. And without breaking stride, our fourth and last speaker for today is Yao Togabo from the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit. Over to you, Yao.
Thank you very much. I hope you all can see my screen. I want to say a massive thank you to all of the previous speakers that spoke before me. It's an absolute honor to be speaking here in front of you about the work that we're doing at the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit. I will say that I am deputizing for my manager, Anthony Morgan. So I'm hoping I can do his present justice and give you a little bit of insight about what CABR is and what are the things that we are doing. It was many moons ago I was a student as well, so I know even when the lecture halls, you know, sometimes we didn't always have the most interesting speakers, but today we've had phenomenal amount of speakers. I'm hoping I don't put you all to sleep at the end, so please stay with me. So Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. Let's get into it. Let me introduce myself a little bit as well. I'm hoping we can have some time at the end for questions, because I've been seeing some meaty questions in the chat box, which has been very interesting. So I'm hoping I can speed along and have some time for as much engagement as possible. So forgive me if I speak fast, but that is the reason of my motivation. So I'm new to government. I'm new to being a government staff. So even though Deputy Mayor Thompson spoke about the excellent, wonderful folks best in the world in it, I still see myself as very much learning the acronyms and finding my way around city government. It was never my thought or intention that I would ever be working in any form of government. For I've been someone that's been spent 20 plus years working predominantly in the community community within the Black community via arts or just for activism and advocacy. So now I find myself here working in government, and in my community hat is more so working for the other side. So it's really an interesting dynamic where I find myself in, and I think many people in the chat may be able to relate to that. So we've heard a lot about CABR. And when I was even working in community, and just so that, to talk about the elephant in the room, it is a London accent. I was born and raised in East London, but I began my relationship with Toronto in 2000, 2001, when finishing university. I came here for a year. But I've been here permanently for since 2013 and working in various different non-for-profit community organizations. And while I was working in these organizations, I did hear a lot about the CABR, Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, and it was somewhat of a I knew about them, but didn't exactly know what they did, and that may be the situation for many folks. And I didn't realize they did as much as they did while I was on the outside, even when I was working on programs that they had been funded. And part of that is by design. But before we go in there, let me go back a little bit so we can understand some of the history behind the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. Now, even though it's situated in the city of Toronto since 2017, we do not move it out of the timeline from the activism that has happened in Toronto, with the many different various leaders that have occurred to represent the community, and the various different organizations that have emerged. Historically, some may have faded, some may have dissipated, some may still be around, but they represent the interest of the community. Now, so we like to see ourselves following in that vein. What has happened as a result, the relationship that Black folks have had with government. Oftentimes, the concerns and interests of the community and the Black community are not seen in the halls of the various different government agencies. So, since the Black folks suffer inequalities, oftentimes that comes to the fore and it bubbles up, and it may bubble up in areas of protests, areas of protests, or what the media would deem riots, but we often deem as uprisings, expressing dissatisfactions from the community. And there's been many of which that has happened throughout the years in Toronto and indeed Canada. But I want to take us back to the most recent and most relevant, which was the ones that happened in 2016, that was really pioneered and fronted by the Black Lives Matter, where they were really highlighting the issues of systemic racism and a lot of systemic abuse that occurred at the hands of the police. So there was lots of different activism that they employed, and lots of different tactics, from sit-ins outside police departments, and also going to the house of councillors and the mayor at the time, demanding more accountability. So what happened as a result was that there was a more so of opening the doors to the community to really further explain and shed further light about some of the concerns and issues that the Black community had, and was and to be honest, it wasn't anything new. It was long-standing issues that the Black community had. So this dialogue, as you can see when you look at look at this timeline, it really began in around 2016, where there was talks or discussions to really discuss what were you going to do about the systemic anti-Black racism that the community had specifically highlighted. So it was our division leader, so CABR sits in the division called the SDFA, which is the Social Development, Finance and Administration division. So our executive director really wanted to employ a consultant to really find out more about what were the community concerns, what were the community issues. So there's various different community engagements that happened that really highlighted what were the main concerns that the community had and how can the city of government then address this. So this was then put to council in 2017 under the title of Confronting Anti-Black Racism plan. It was unanimously adopted by the council for it to be implemented throughout the years of 2018 to 2022. So let's go deep about what were some of the systemic issues or systemic concerns that were discussed and highlighted. So when we look at the population of Toronto, the Black population makes up 7.5% of the population. At the time when we look at the systemic statistics, very concerning because it doesn't reflect 7.5% of the population. 3.5% of Black households are more likely to be food insecure. This is in the country of Canada rather than just Toronto to white households. But looking back in Toronto, 43.6% of Black children live in poverty compared to 51% of non-racialized children. When we look at the police force, we know that's been a long-standing issue. 28.8% Black communities are likely to experience the use of force, and 61.5 deadly encounters with the police. We look at COVID cases, 25% of Black folks were experiencing COVID cases, and also when we look at the levels of income inequality, 21%. I mean, these are just some statistics. We could go literally on and on for a separate engagement just dealing with the statistics and how it doesn't reflect the 7.5% of the population in Toronto. So the question is, how does the CABR now work to try and address these issues and address these concerns? I forgot to mention at the top end is that the community consultations were absolutely key, because we could hire a group of Black staff to go into the city of Toronto, and they can come up with various different action plans and say, you know what, this is what's important to the Black community, that is what's important to the Black community. But it was the various different community engagements that happened to inform what the policies, what the plan of the anti-Black racism was going to be. So after the various different engagements, I believe there was 41 engagements where 22 recommendations were then given, and 82 priority areas were thereby established. So therefore, we actually have our work plan. We have what our community concerns are, and our job is to make sure that these community concerns get manifest and executed by the city or with the support of the city of Toronto. I won't say by the city, but I'd say with the support of the city of Toronto. I'll explain further through the actual structure in how the CABR is structured. So we have 3 different departments. We have the policy development officers. The policy development officers really are looking at the macro, largest scale operational plans of the city of Toronto, and what policies are in place that impact the Black community, and what policies in place that may need to be challenged, and what are the policies that the community wish to be in place. So they'll be in charge of really doing the research and writing the policies and the recommendations, which would eventually go to be debated at committee and then thereafter go to council. Then you have my position, which is a community development officer. So a community development officer really builds relationships with the community organizations. So when I said before that it's not necessarily the responsibility of the city staff, it's still the responsibility of the community, because we as folks in the Black community, we want to ensure that the Black community are in the positions and doing the activities and actions needed in order to stimulate change within the communities. And because for a long time there has been a separation from the community being reflected within the city of Toronto, and it's still that. It's by no means perfect, but what community organizations have done is they've essentially taken up the role that many governmental organizations may have been expected to deliver. So they are really the first line. They have been the first line of the defense. They're considered the non-for-profit organizations. Sometimes they're considered the voluntary sector organizations, but oftentimes these are concerned citizens that in the community that have taken up the challenge of representing issues within the community. This may be anything down to food shortages. It may be down to trying to keep the community at peace. It may be down to activism and advocacy of various different political items and issues. But oftentimes these are regular people within the community that are taking this up. So what we are now trying to do is we're trying to amplify the work of the community organizations. So when we have the various different recommendations and the various different priorities, what we do is that we work with the community organizations in order to deliver these priorities and recommendations. This is why when I was on the outside, the CABR was doing work, and some of the work that they were doing, they actually funded, but I didn't necessarily connect it to the work of the CABR, because the work was still being done by the community organizations, still being funded by the community organizations, but they, on the backhand, or we as CABR, had make sure that the support and the had facilitated to make sure that the work that the community organization could do could be done and effective and have the support of folks in the city of Toronto. I hope this is all making sense. And finally, the last, but by no means least, is the training and development officers. So the training development officers, they coordinate and deliver learning sessions and opportunities for the City of Toronto staff to embed the recommendations and actions of the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. So we have trained staff as well as trained members of the community who are also experts in this area that we hire as facilitators to engage the various different units and departments within the City of Toronto so that they can get a deeper understanding of what anti-Black racism is, what it looks like, and how it may be hidden within the works that they already do. So we can provide them the tools to name it, shame it, see it, and be given the tools to challenge it where it may be possible. Because without the staff who are engaged in vital and critical work being able to understand it, then the subconscious and subversive racism could still go unchecked. So it's fundamental that the training development officers are able to engage the City of Toronto staff in the way that they do. So, what has been some of the achievements of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit? There was in the year 2, there was the Toronto Police Advisory Panel. So there was an individual in the community, Andrew Loku, who was gunned down by police officers. And as a result, there was a Toronto Police Advisory Panel, which was created in his honor to really have a look at what were the policies that the police were inducting, the actions that the police were doing that needed to be challenged. And part of what needed to be challenged or integrated was the disaggregated race-based data. Disaggregated race-based data is one of the only reasons or the only ways in which we can statistically break down what has been happening to us as a community so that we can display and show that we are experiencing things that we shouldn't be experiencing by X and Y numbers. Without that race-based data, then there's no way we can justify it. Then it becomes anecdotal and it doesn't have a foundation or a basis to stand on. Another achievement was the establishment of the Black Staff Network. Now, this is something that happens within the city of Toronto. So it's an advocacy body on behalf of Black staff, whereby it can provide opportunities, provide professional development and mentorship, and enables Black staff to feel a little bit more connected, and to find ways in how they can navigate this, this big workplace called the City of Toronto, and find ways that they could advance their careers. Because one of the also elements is oftentimes black staff may be front line workers, or may have be stagnated in the development of their careers. The inclusion of the Black Staff Network is designed to help navigate that. I want to highlight some of the work that was done with the People and Equity department. Now, 94, they've really embraced a lot of the work that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism have done. And they have had 94% of their staff in year 2 receive customized training. They also targeted initiatives to encourage Black youth to actually get involved within the City of Toronto, to try and demystify and break down barriers that this is the City of Toronto is not a space for them. So this year there was the Black Youth Career Development plan, which actually hired 17 Black youth across 12 different units within the City of Toronto. So many of those folks are employed and working at the moment as well. And finally, I did want to, I'm excited by the Black food sovereignty, and I'm going to give a little summary of the actual journey, because this for me represents the template of how the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit does work and should work going forward. Now, there's a long-standing organization within the Black community called the African Food Basket, and they focus on food insecurity and food sovereignty. They've been working in the community, very little support, very little funding for over 30 years, and they've been supplying food grown from the farm to the community. Now, they actually contacted the management of the CABR and highlighted the fact that there is a massive need for food sovereignty, for Black community to take more control over the growing, the production and distribution of their own food. So as a result of that, the CABR funded a stronger community conference, because it's all well and good the community organization highlighting us, but it was really important for us to understand, well, what is the community saying? Yes, you're saying that as a well-respected community organization, but what is the rest of the totality of the Black community saying? So during this conference, there are many discussions that were had, and from those discussions from diverse players within the food sovereignty sector came various different recommendations. Now, our policy makers were attended the conference and were able now to put these recommendations to a paper and a report. So this report then was then sent out to the involved various different departments of the City of Toronto as well, because these initiatives don't just happen by themselves. They happen in combination with various different other units within the city as well. So out of which came a report. This report went to committee. The committee discussed it and then voted on it, and this is hot off the press. So this happened only September 22nd, which was Wednesday, and I'm pleased to announce that the report was passed. So there's passed. So there is now a report that's passed committee to reflect Black food sovereignty in the community. Now it still has to go to council, but after it go, but this still means that us as community development workers and the CABR now have work to do. Part of the work is developing an advisory, and an advisory again is going to be other members in the community and in the food sector that can advise where we need to go with the plan. And part of our commitment and our role is to ensure that we can get the resources and the support needed to ensure that community organizations are able to maneuver and navigate through their challenges, in order for them to meet the objectives a lot easier than they would be had they had they not had any inside or connections to folks that are working within the halls of government. I hope that was all clear. I want to thank you all for listening. I hope I was within time, and I'll pass back to our hosts.
Thank you, Yao. I am going to abuse my position as moderator. My apologies to the professors in the room. It's 10:58 according to my computer, but I would like to conclude with a Q&A because we got some questions from students and I want to make this an inclusive session. So let us just take another 5 minutes before we conclude this session. There are two sets of questions. I see your questions, Emily, Chantel, and Andrew, over the last half an hour, but I'm going to take the first set of questions that came in within the first hour, and this is from PS, Gus, Tyler, and Chantel. And for the speakers, if I could restate these questions, the questions were concerned about the front end and back end of your work to the speakers. And if I could restate it, Gus, you were asking about the adoption of culturally sensitive methodologies that guide the work of the respective units and offices. Maybe the speakers can speak to that, and that is the front end bit of the process. And then there were questions from others, from Tyler, from PF, and Chantel, and they were interested to know about the specific outcomes that each unit or office has in mind. So what is the end goal, as it were? So if I could invite the speakers to respond to these two frames or dimensions of the question.
So I could take the question on the cultural methodologies. So I believe this question came out of when I gave using culturally sensitive methodologies to come to conclusions in your research as an example of how to embed equity into processes. So I'll just give a couple of examples. The first example is, for example, if you're holding consultations with the community, making sure that you use a cultural calendar. So making sure that you don't hold consultations on Sabbath or Ramadan, and ensuring it's accessible. So making sure you have an ASL interpreter, and if it's catered, selecting culturally appropriate foods. Also, another example would be working with communities to structure approaches and planning. So because working with them, you'd be able to ensure that your approaches will be meaningful to that community. And also just making sure that you build in communities' diverse experiences into the data collection and consultation frameworks. So for example, for Indigenous consultations, you'd need to follow the principles of OCAP, which stands for ownership, control, access, and possession. So it's just kind of a data governance framework for Indigenous peoples.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Alika. If I could just add to that really quickly as well. I know there were some questions, Leslie, as you mentioned, about the end, like what is the end outcome that we're working towards? So for our unit, we very much have a corporate function. So we're not directly responsible for delivering services, but our end outcome that we're focused on is ensuring that the city and all of its divisions are actually embedding equity and reconciliation and those considerations into all of their work. And so we're focused on driving commitment in the city, increasing knowledge, building capacity, and embedding accountability. So an example, for instance, is that we ensuring that all reports to council have an equity analysis embedded into their work, as well as things like mandatory equity training. And then also, as Alika said, it's when we are advising or supporting community engagements, we focus on ensuring that it's centered around communities and asking ourselves who's not at the table, and if not, why, and building and embedding those approaches and really centering the needs of the communities in all of our approaches.
Mm-hmm. And Jennifer and Yao, would you like to speak to these sets of questions?
Sure. When it comes to cultural methodologies, it's a real interesting one, because obviously in the Black community there's not necessarily a particular culture. There are various different cultures, and there's also principles that we recognize that we're trying to really influence as well, and trying to demystify the adoption of certain principles, especially within the African cultural system and cultural practices. So there's one cultural practice which is important, which is the Ubuntu, which we're really trying to take on board as the Confront Anti-Black Racism, which is, I am because we are. So it really facilitates a not necessarily individualistic perspective, but how can we as a community assist, help, and work with each other. So we try and embed that within our practice. We also try and inform other city divisions by the recognition of dates that are important to us, beyond just obviously Black History Month. But there's also the adoption of Emancipation Month, which happens in August. And during that time, there's actually the raising of the flag, which is the Pan-African flag, the red, black, and green flag, which was actually founded by Marcus Garvey. So that's a legacy which we try to and for those that don't know, Marcus Garvey is one of the most significant Black leaders that we'd had over in the 20th century. So that we're trying to demystify some of our leaders, some of our practices, and drip that in, not only just with us, but to throughout how we interact with the rest of the city of Toronto. You heard earlier on we had the land acknowledgement, and also the African ancestry acknowledgement as well. I'll pass on to Jennifer, because I could keep talking, so I gotta know when to stop. So Jennifer, you have the floor.
So Jennifer, if I could push you in terms of the concreteness of outcomes, could you speak to, say, some unique challenges that Indigenous communities face?
Unique challenges that the Indigenous community face?
Some unique challenges that the urban Indigenous community faces. Since the focus is on the city, as it were.
Yeah. So, well, so some of the things that I mentioned were lack of access to land, the complexity of like Yao was saying, that there's not a singular cultural identity, that there's multiple cultural identities. Just to build off of what Srijani was saying, that there are intersectional identities within the Indigenous community. So the experiences of Indigenous women, the experiences of Two-Spirit people, and so on. So the different ways of different levels of government treat Indigenous people differently. And so there's unique opportunities within the municipal government to not be bound by, just like as an example, education is a provincially mandated topic. For Indigenous nations, like for First Nations, it's federal. And it's not actually because of the education, it's because they're considered, like, Indigenous people are considered like a topic to manage in the federal government. So it's a different allocation of funding. And so then that funding both has a different value system, but also it is substantially less than all other students, like the actual funding dollars that go to Indigenous people. And so again, the City of Toronto is in a position to address the injustices sort of creatively to meet the diverse needs of the Indigenous community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jennifer. And just to echo Yao, I'm looking at your question in the chat box. It's a great question. Unfortunately, it's 11:07. I would have loved for us to take more questions. Just to assure you, we have them on paper, and we will ask the speakers to get to them, and we'll disseminate their responses to your respective professors. Please tune in further for the responses. Unfortunately, we have to go. So on that note, let me thank again our speakers for such a wonderful presentation. And just a reminder before we go back to our respective classes that our next city presentation is on 8th October, and the theme in question is community resiliency. I would also like to take this opportunity to tell you about a 2-day CivicLabTO Summit, which is a series of free virtual panel discussions featuring leaders from academia and the City of Toronto. The summit will focus on the city's recovery and rebuild efforts on issue areas ranging from public health to climate change and green recovery. That will take place on 23rd and 24th November. For more information, please visit www.civiclabto.ca/about. So until the next time, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
And thank you again to everyone, speakers.
No problem. I was just saying, we've got a year 2 video that I definitely would like to share with you, Leslie, for you to share with all of the students. That will be coming out next week, so I'll send that to you.
All right.
Thank
For sure,
you.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.